Hi everyone, I'm George Farrar. Welcome to our fourth of four History Jacksonville specials, which capstone the 85 show series here on YouTube that I created and presented from 2012 to 2020. On today, July 16th, 2021, I'm pleased to present to you an amazing story. The story of how Jacksonville, Florida rose from the ashes of the Great Fire of 1901. The central focus of our story is the creative works of the legendary architect Henry John Klutho. He designed and led the construction of the St. James Building, which opened in 1912. It is currently Jacksonville's City Hall. Henry Klutho is known for his architecture and civic involvement in early 20th century Jacksonville. He would eventually utilize the Prairie School of Architecture. His skill and creativity can be seen all around Jacksonville to this very day. The Dialup church building was built around 1901 and was the first large downtown structure to be built after the fire. It was originally occupied by a Georgia lumber firm, which I could imagine needed it to run operations as the city was rapidly rebuilding in the years after the Great Fire of 1901. He was commissioned to build a new city hall for Jacksonville after the fire. It opened in 1902. It was demolished in the 1960s to make way for what is now the DuPont Center, previously the Hayden Burns Public Library. He designed the Jacksonville Public Library made possible by industrialist and philanthropist Andrew Carnegie, that was a library from 1904 to 1965 and still stands to this day. In the late 1920s, he designed the Hogan's Creek Improvement, which winded its way through Springfield Park, which is now known as Henry J. Klutho Park. Here I am on a hot and humid July day in 2014, filming with a friend for a History Jacksonville show, enjoying what remained of what he had designed. Time and neglect had taken its toll by that time. I was inspired as a child reading about Henry Klutho's role in Jacksonville, in Jacksonville's development, in Old Hickory's Town, a book by James Robertson Ward. We sometimes don't see the origins of something amazing in our lives. I couldn't have believed, as a child, what I would one day accomplish in helping to tell Jacksonville stories in a digital format. I wanted to be an architect. I ended up working in finance instead. So just who was Klutho? Born in Illinois in 1873, he moved to St. Louis and later New York City. Our focus on his life is totally Jacksonville, spanning his life from 1901 to 1964. A combination of fate and cunning entrepreneurship will ensure Jacksonville a bright future after the Great Fire. Back in the 1860s, after the Civil War, Jacksonville had developed a tourist industry, and tourists, naturally, need hotels. On the site of the current City Hall, the St. James Building was a previous place called the St. James Hotel. Across from it, on land donated by the family of Isaiah Hart, a founder of Jacksonville, was a park. It was originally called City Park. It was renamed St. James Park. Later, Hemming Park. Even later than that, renamed Hemming Plaza. Then back to Hemming Park. Then finally, James Weldon Johnson Park. Jacksonville was growing by the 1890s and even had started a streetcar system. Then, on May 3rd, 1901, the cruelest day ever in Jacksonville's history, it all burned down. An estimated 10,000 people were homeless. Tents were erected in Riverside as salvaging and rebuilding began. People came from all over to help. The story goes that Klutho read about the disaster on a train in New York City and quickly made his way south to Jacksonville. He got in good with the politicians like Mayor Duncan Fletcher, businessmen, and other establishment types who needed buildings for the places where work, living, and play happened, and they needed them yesterday. He quickly built his local reputation in a time when you met with people or talked on the phone to conduct business or wrote letters. It was a time when people's reputations, personalities, and social status hinged on their physical not digital presence, among others. Fate, once again, benefits early 20th century Jacksonville in 1905 when Klutho meets Frank Lloyd Wright, whose Prairie School concepts, also known as the Chicago Group, were being widely adapted as the future of American architecture at that time. Klutho would come home with some grand ideas. He and the people of Jacksonville would bring them to fruition. He built the old YMCA building, later a Haverty's Furniture Store, now known as the Jake Godbold Annex. He built the Hotel Seminole. He built the Bisbee Building. Check out this ad for the Bisbee Building when it first opened. The Bisbee Building. Progressive people are always found in the best office building in every city. They get away from the out-of-date places and into a modern building. It means more business. Just about what the ordinary kind cost, but with all the new features of the big office buildings of New York. Fastest elevator service in Jacksonville. Vacuum cleaning system entirely. Ice-cooled pure artesian water. Perfect janitor service, modern tungsten lights, adjustable window shades, awnings, white enamel lavatories, everything new. Call and look the building over. W.A. Bisbee, Bisbee Building. He built the Florida Life Building. 2/3 of what is commonly called today the Laura Street Trio. The time came for him to build his greatest achievement and masterpiece when in 1910 the Cohen brothers commissioned him to build the St. James Building. The hotel had burned down during the Great Fire. He utilized innovative construction techniques and led the construction, which was done by approximately 200 workmen. It opened in October of 1912 as the Cohen Brothers Big Store. It also had offices including Kluthos. So the Cohen Brothers was a department store. It was a huge, huge retail store for its time in Jacksonville. The building was so much of a presence downtown that 10 years after May Cohen's closed in 1987, Jacksonville renovated it into a new city hall that opened for operations in late 1997. The scope of Klutho's work was astounding. He was everywhere. He produced so much that even with what I'm presenting to you, you're just seeing a glimpse. He even got into the movie-making business, building movie studios when Jacksonville was on the cusp of early 20th century film production. Check out this ad for one of Klutho's studios. Klutho Studio, Jacksonville, Florida, in Florida. No ice, no snow, foliage all the year. Largest for-rent plant outside New York and West Coast. Will accommodate 4 companies, Cooper Hewitts, and plenty of carbon lights. This plant needs a manager, one who understands the requirements of the producers and can bring them down. Such a party can keep the place filled 9 months out of 12. To such a party, I want to sell a half interest in the plant reasonably low. The plant costs $70,000. The owner has his time taken up with other business, and so cannot give same the attention it requires. J Klutho, owner, St. James Building, Jacksonville, Florida. A big moneymaker if kept busy. 9 months out of 12, a good manager can do this. A southern studio is badly needed by the producers operating in the north. Here is one already built. Until the exodus to Los Angeles. It was an interesting time in Jacksonville. The city even owned a radio station, WJAX. Now is the point in the story when I share directly with you his thoughts about what he built and the city in which he lived most of his life. Get ready. It's not necessarily what you would expect. I will now share with you Mr. Klutho's thoughts about the Hogan's Creek Improvement Project. He said, in 1927, there was passed a bond election by which $500,000 was voted for improvements to Hogan's Creek. heretofore an unsightly and rather filthy stream. A general opinion prevailed that a large underground duct should be designed, a purely engineering problem. Nearly 2 years had passed by with nothing done, and the 500,000 just about to pass into oblivion, when I was called upon as a member of the Springfield Boosters Club to report at its next meeting why nothing had been accomplished. I found a lack of interest in the problem among the engineers. The general opinion was not enough funds for so large a duct. This gave me the idea to make an artistic open-air canal out of it with architectural embellishments. I showed my sketch to C.V. Imison, Charles Imison, well-known engineer, and proposed that we collaborate with the result that the Springfield Boosters and the Springfield Women's Club, under the able leadership of Miss W.S. Jennings, stormed the citadel of the City Commission at its next meeting, and with my sketches succeeded in convincing its members of the plausibility of the scheme, and so another sore spot on the face of the city's map was eliminated and the bond issue saved from being placed back on the shelf of time limitations or forgotten things. I will now share with you his direct insights on what he considered his biggest accomplishments. Dialup Church Building, 1901. The first bank and office building built the same year of the Great Fire by the Dialup Church Lumber Company. J&C Stockton promoted the investment through his bank. His bank occupied the corner. A few years later, this bank was absorbed by what is now known as the Atlantic National Bank. This then became the first home of this well-known institution. It was the first built on a wood pile foundation, has iron columns with joists. City Hall, 1902. Erected 1 year after the Great Fire at the very low figure of $90,000. Was selected architect from among 12 competitors. The original builder left the job unfinished, whereas thereupon Frank Richardson completed same. When you consider that the building has stood up for over 40 years and still going, the city got dollar for dollar. Public Library, 1904. Made possible through the generosity of Andrew Carnegie. It is thoroughly fireproof. Even the roof rafters are of steel, tees, and terracotta slabs between for slate roof. This plan won in a competition with 6 other architects. The prospectus called for plain black lines on white paper, no colored perspective allowed. Architect's name not to appear, only his nom de plume. In this way, favoritism could not be shown. YMCA Building, 1907. Actually, the first reinforced concrete building erected in Florida. Over a gymnasium, there are placed 40 feet long girders with 2 diam tension rods supporting 5 stories. A rather daring engineering venture in those early days when little was known of that class of construction. The late W. W. Cummer was chairman of the building committee and largest contributor to the building fund. 1908 Seminole Hotel was originally planned as a bank and office building promoted by Cromwell Gibbons and Associations. Columns and girders were in place when Mr. Pound from Chattanooga happened in town and right then recited that the site was better suited for a hotel than an office building. Within but a few days, Mr. Pound took over and the architect instructed to replan building into a hotel. This was not such a simple matter since all steel framing was already in place. Bisbee Building, 1908, W.A. Bisbee, owner. Now owned by Florida National Bank, was the first reinforced concrete frame office building built in Florida. This system was so new, then the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company refused to make a construction loan. Only after full engineering data was submitted and their own architect made a special trip down to go over figures with me did they finally reconsider and made the loan. It supported on spread footings, no piles, has not settled a fraction of an inch. Florida Life Building, 1911. Now owned by Florida National Bank, first 11-story office building resting on concrete pile instead the usual wood pile. They are some 17-inch square on top, tapering to 9 inches at the bottom. In center is encased a 1.5 pipe with a hose connection at top. A force pump and city water pressure forces water through pipe, and pile is jetted down to required depth. Pressure is turned off and the sand packs around pile so tightly that nothing dislodges it. Footings are then anchored, making it tornado-proof. 1912, St. James Building, built by subletting all contracts, direct by owner, under supervision of architect who also okayed all bills and payrolls. The original idea of owner was to build a 2-story arcade with balconies running all around. 3 designs were submitted. Architect then drew a 4-story plan and soon convinced the owners that by adding 2 floors of offices, it would not only become a shopping center, but one of business too. Buildings erected in Jacksonville in the early period of Reconstruction after the 1901 fire with a bit of history attached. Around 1927, the Coen brothers, in the quest for more retail space, removed the octagonal rotunda he had constructed. It was later restored in the 1990s renovation. In disgust, Mr. Klutho vacated his office in the building and relocated his office to his apartments in Springfield. In the 1940s, he had offices in the old Bostock building, now the Calford Chop House. Another legendary architect, Robert Broward, met him in the 1950s. Henry J. Klutho died at the age of 91 in 1964, around 11 years before I was born. We now flash forward from the 1960s to view some contemporary views of some of his surviving works. I was fortunate to enjoy life in Jacksonville in the last 25 years of the 20th century, and also to experience it in the 21st century. In a lot of ways, Henry Klutho's development, his work, carried the city forward from tragic times to the growth that I was able to enjoy, and a lot of the places I was able to enjoy growing up in Jacksonville while learning about his accomplishments. After my father died, I had returned back to Jacksonville from Orlando, and I began looking at a lot of different websites, and I was really going on to looking at YouTube and deciding I wanted to make YouTube videos, and I wanted to talk about the city I grew up in, that I experienced a lot of my life in. Around 2011, I decided it was time that I could begin doing it, and so I started preparing, and by 2012, I had developed a YouTube series called History Jacksonville. And so from 2012 to 2020, I went around Jacksonville and filmed and took pictures, and I would take these pictures and images and information I had and knowledge that I had and synthesize it into what we know now are the 85 shows of the History Jacksonville series. And, of course, the 4-show special series I did following the successful History Jacksonville run on YouTube. In 2019, I decided to move from Jacksonville to where I live now in El Cajon in Southern California. I will always treasure my experiences that I had in Jacksonville, and I've always enjoyed telling the stories of Jacksonville's history, which to me, I think sometimes circulate in my soul and greater being. Over Jacksonville's history, the people of Jacksonville have rallied to great effect, and it's a cycle that I've seen throughout Jacksonville's history, emanating from the Civil War. The Civil War was destructive. Jacksonville builds a tourist industry, has expositions, builds hotels. The railroad helps, of course, in this. Time goes on, the city builds, then is beset by the tragic Great Fire of 1901. Rapidly, the city rebuilds and grows with great effect and great impact. The city makes it through the Great Depression. The city makes it through economic problems. It survives through massive growth in the 1950s and 1960s. But then again, facing stress brought upon that growth, the people rallied once again to develop a consolidated form of local government, basically a reform of the local government. In the 1990s, beset by changing economics and wanting to create a national identity, to be nationally known, to be nationally recognized, the people of Jacksonville rallied for an NFL team and got it. These are changing times, and I, of course, cannot predict where the city of Jacksonville will go in the future. The best thing that I can suggest is to take a look at Jacksonville's past for glimpses of the possible futures that are ahead. So, speaking of the future ahead, I'd like to talk with you about History Jacksonville and where we go from here. So, this is the capstone of the History Jacksonville Project that started in 2012. So, what will happen now is on the Jack's Life channel on YouTube, I'll proceed with Jack's 90, Jack's 91, Jack's 92, Jack's 93, Jack's 94, and Jack's 95, covering the years in Jacksonville history from 1990 to 1995. That will finish off my 20-year, year-by-year series that examined the history of Jacksonville from 1975 all the way up through 1995. Then, in the summer of 2022, in honor of the petition to the United States of America by the people of a place called Calford to have a port of entry named after Andrew Jackson, named Jacksonville, to be designated. In honor of that 200th anniversary, I will be presenting a commemorative History Jacksonville show with the design to be announced later on. Now, you may ask, well, what happens with all these great pictures and photos and images and things that you've done? Well, I have a Facebook group page called History Jacksonville, and that will be continuing on. And I have other things I'll be working on. And I can't guarantee a lot of future specials many years down the road, as I'm moving towards different mediums, different modes, and different topics as I work to talk more about the history of where I now live in El Cajon, California, learning about and talking about Southern California history, because life moves on. So I want to thank you. I also want to do one last thank you and recognition to numerous people in my life and to numerous sources that I've utilized. I look back at my history teachers at what was then Forest High School, now known as Westside High. I think back in the 90s to John Meese and Ralph Lawson, and Margaret Atwood, Mr. Williams, and my political science teacher, Miss Butler. I think back to the nurturing that happened, the knowledge that I gained, the academics I learned. I got a 5 on the Advanced Placement American History exam, by the way. I managed to get a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's degree in public administration, both degrees from Florida State University in Tallahassee, Florida, in the 1990s, and I work in finance now. So, to a city that has been so kind to me in a lot of ways, I present to you these 85 shows, these 4 specials, these other shows scattered over 2 YouTube channels. And I thank all of you out there, my friends who inspired me, and the sources I used, including FloridaMemory.com, the State Archives of Florida, the Jacksonville Historical Society, which has some excellent resources on Klutho, the old website MetroJacksonville.com, which portions of it still remain out there in the internet ether. Other sources and places, postcard sites and various Facebook group pages, Jeff Davies, Robert Sanford. I think of these people who I've never met, and I don't believe I've ever spoken with, but they exercise great capability in knowing and being able to explain the past through their works. So they're recognized. And I recognized the people that made it happen, and I do think that people like Mayor Jake Godbold, Mayor Ed Austin, Mayor John Delaney, speaking from the heart, these mayors made my life better. Jacksonville took a direction in 2019 and had been for 4 or 5 years prior. I left for numerous reasons, but primarily, in some ways, kind of like Henry Klutho did. It was time for a new experience. It was time to do some great things. It was time to go somewhere and make an impact. And he left New York, and he worked and lived in Jacksonville for a long time. And what amazing accomplishments people could make through persistence, determination, and hard work. Thanks for watching. Take it easy. I will see you later out there, YouTube, Facebook, anywhere and everywhere. Maybe one day you and I will one day personally meet. Who knows? The sky's the limit. Take it easy. See you later. Goodbye.